So Andreas is the first lord to play. His card is the first command card that is turned up. He uses his first 2 command points to move from Adsel through Karumpa into Izborsk. He is now in Russian territory. It's an undefended Russian stronghold, which means he automatically begins a siege of Izborsk. Siege marker is placed. He's moved. He has to pay a piece of provender. His turn comes to an end. Gavrilo is the first Russian lord to play. Supply, because of the famine, will only provide 1 piece of provender, and he wouldn't be able to forage. So instead of that, because he has ample food for the time being, he uses the Veliki Knyaz capability, which allows him to tax gaining a coin, and as a special bonus, 2 additional transports. Herman is the next Teutonic knight to move. He has stacked on top of Yaroslav, making him lieutenant, and effectively Yaroslav must now do everything that Herman does. He is entirely subservient. They decide to move immediately on Pskov, using all 3 of Herman's command points to get them there. Gavrilo has the choice to meet them in battle outside the walls, or, as he chooses to do, retreat into the walls. Herman and Yaroslav have both moved. They both spend a piece of provender. Vladislav uses his entire command card to play the Stone Kremlin capability, building up the walls at Kybalovo. The Danes at Narvia have little they can do. The famine is restricting all the lords in their supply actions, and are restricted to a single supply as they contemplate crossing the border into Russia. Vladislav has now made up his mind which way to go, and he heads north. The Novgorod Archbishopric card gives him an extra command point, which allows him 3 movements that takes him by a combination of track and river to join Vladislav in Kybalovo. He's moved. He spends 1 of his provender. Teuton progress is much slower than they would have liked, and it's not being helped at all by the famine, which is making preparations much harder. Andreas at Izborsk can do little else other than supply for 1 piece of provender. Were he to leave Izborsk, the siege would be lifted. It's an option, but having started the siege, he wants to get it completed. Without more food, that just won't be possible. We're in what feels like a bit of a phony war at the moment, with not a great deal of action. Vladislav is the next Russian command card. He is able to use the transport now brought to Kybalovo by Domash to trace a route back to Ladoga and bolster his supplies by 1 piece of provender. Poor planning, which is the result really of lack of experience with the game, demonstrates itself now. Herman is up next, and he is at Pskov, but unable to launch a siege of the stronghold, despite being there with Yaroslav, because it is a 3 strength stronghold and there are only 2 of the Teutonic lords present. They would need Andreas there to begin the siege. So, failing that, which is what they'd hoped to do, they are able at least to trace for 1 command point a supply route back to Dorpat for a provender, and then to ravage in the area. Ravaging provides another piece of provender and some loot as they pilfer the neighbouring territory. The ravaged marker is placed, It brings half a victory point to the Teuton side, but that space cannot be ravaged again this game unless an event allows them to do so. Tomasz is next. He traces a route back to Novgorod to supply a piece of provender. It seems inevitable that the Danish princes will be leaving the campaign at the start of the next turn, so in a final act they avoid a direct confrontation at Kaibelovo, take to their boats, having to leave a piece of provender behind because they don't have quite enough capacity to carry all their provender and their horses, and sail along the Baltic Sea coast to Neva, a trading route. It's undefended, automatically conquered for a victory point. They've moved, they pay, and we shall see whether they have any chance of extending their service. It seems unlikely. It's the final campaign action, and it's Vladislav who is up. The Danish incursion into Neva has left the back door open, and Vladislav uses the opportunity to trundle into Navia and ravage the territory himself. Gains half a victory point for his side, and a piece of loot and a piece of provender, which gets spent immediately for the movement. But it's a sign to the Teutonic order that the Russians are quite happy to mount incursions of their own. We're into the end campaign stage. At this point, all lords have to, because we're in the final summer turn and about to move into winter, have to halve the number of carts they currently have, and having rounded that number up, convert it into sleds. So if you have 4 carts, that is converted into 2 sleds, sleds being the only transport that can be used during winter. Then each lord has to get rid of an asset if they have more than one of any type of asset. The outcome of that is that Heinrich, on the far west edge of the map, gets rid of a ship. Andreas gets rid of a boat. Yaroslav gets rid of a sled. Herman gets rid of a piece of provender, as does Gavrilo. Tomasz rids himself of a boat. Vladislav of a piece of provender, and the Danes of a ship. And with that, the end of campaigning in turn 2 is reached.